In this lesson, we will talk about congruence of shapes. We say two shapes are congruent when you place one shape over another, and if it overlaps the other shape exactly, then those two shapes are said to be congruent. Sometimes you might have to either rotate or flip a shape in order to overlap the other shape exactly. So if you are able to do that with a combination of flips or turns or rotations, and if both the shapes overlap each other exactly, then those two shapes are said to be congruent. And we represent congruence of shapes with this symbol. And if they are not congruent, we represent it with the other symbol, as you see over here. So now let's consider some shapes. For instance, if you are given two circles and you need to figure out if those two circles are congruent or not, all you do is place the second circle over the first circle and see if it overlaps it exactly. Sometimes you may not be able to do that. So what are the things that we look for mathematically to figure out if shapes are congruent or not? Especially in the terms of circles, if we know the radius of the circle, and if the radius of two circles is the same, then we call that circles as congruent circles, because there can be only one unique circle that can be drawn with a certain radius. For example, if I give you a 5 centimeter radius, you can draw only one circle. You cannot draw any other circle which looks different and which has the same radius, that is 5 centimeters. So all you need is one dimension to figure out if two circles are congruent, that is radius. Similarly, in terms of squares, again, all we need to know is a side of the square. If we know the side of the square, then we can compare two squares and say if they are congruent or not. There can be only a unique square with a certain side. In the case of rectangles, however, we need two dimensions. Those are length and breadth, because I can have two rectangles with the same length but different breadths. But I cannot have two rectangles with the same length and breadth and look different. If you observe here, these are two rectangles. If I ask you if they are congruent or not, you may say by looking at the shapes that they look different and they are not congruent. But as I mentioned earlier, in order to verify if a shape is congruent or not, you sometimes have to rotate the shape and see if it overlaps the other shape exactly. So let's try to do that. So I'm selecting this shape over here. Then I'll try to rotate it in such a way that somewhat similar to the other rectangle, and then I'll try to overlap it and figure out if they are the same. And as you observe, the second rectangle overlaps the first rectangle exactly. So by just doing one rotation, I was able to conclude that these two rectangles are congruent.